WordPress provides a series of personal settings for users to customize their experience when they work in the backend admin area. These settings don't have a direct impact on the blog as other people see it on the web, but affect how the admin area looks, works, and behaves. These settings are user-specific, so if there are multiple users registered to one blog or site, each user can set her own personal settings independently. To get to your personal settings, go to the dashboard and go down to Users and Personal Settings. Off the top here, you have this WordPress.com API key. This is an advanced feature, and it's something that you would only really use if you use a self-hosted WordPress blog, but it's good to know where it is found, and this is where it's found. Directly underneath, you have all your personal options. The very first one is Fun Mode. It says Surprise Me, and it's called Fun Mode. I'm not going to say anything about it. Just if you are curious, activate it and see what happens. The next one is Visual Editor, and this is actually an important one. Visual Editor is a WYSIWYG editor, or what you see is what you get editor, that appears inside the Edit Post and Edit Page panels. It basically shows you what the post will look like when it gets published, meaning if you set something to a heading, it'll actually display as a heading. I recommend you leave this unchecked, so you always have the visual editor if you want it. Below that, you have this admin color scheme option. The default is set to gray, and this only really pertains to the admin area itself. You see it's gray here, it's gray on the side here, and this box is gray. If you change it to blue, click Save Changes, and reload the page, you'll see that all these areas are now blue instead of gray. Personally, I prefer the gray, so I'll set it back, Save Changes, and reload the page. Below the admin color scheme, you have keyboard shortcuts. This only pertains to comment moderation. It basically means if you have a lot of comments and you have to go through each individually and mark them as approved or not approved or spam, you can get keyboard shortcuts to do that much faster. But this only really comes into play if you have a lot of comments, like several hundred a day. If you only have a couple, it doesn't really matter. If you do activate it, click on the More Information link and read all about it so that you know all the keyboard shortcuts and you can really get the most out of it. Below keyboard shortcuts, we have Twitter API. This is a very advanced feature that links up to your Twitter client so that when you tweet, those tweets are automatically pushed to your blog and posted. It's an interesting new feature, and it can be good or it can be bad. It depends. If you want your entire Twitter stream on your blog, then activate it. But I don't know if everyone wants that. If you do it, you have to really click this Learn More button and set it up properly. It's quite tricky, but it's quite effective too. And it relates directly to this option down here called Publish Geolocation Data with Status Updates. If you have Twitter location activated on your Twitter account, each tweet will have the location of where it was tweeted from. So if you're out with your cell phone, it'll actually say where you were when you sent the tweet. And if you have this button checked, that information gets pushed onto your blog so people can see where your blog post was located. Related to this is a new feature inside the personal settings called My Location. You can actually set where you are when you blog by checking it. And what happens is the blog will now carry around the information that, for instance, all of these posts were posted from Ventura in California. That means when people go on Google and they're in Ventura, California, and they search for flowers, they're way more likely to find this blog because it's geotagged with Ventura, California. Below the Twitter API option, we have browser connection. This has to do with how your browser connects to WordPress.com. If you check it, WordPress.com will always be accessed through an HTTPS connection, which is a more secure connection than the regular HTTP. The problem is the WordPress.com HTTPS connection is a bit wonky, and it's even worse if you use Internet Explorer as your browser. So in many cases, even though this is checked, you'll still only access it through HTTP. It's still a good thing to check it though, because it protects the information you're sending back and forth between WordPress and yourself. Underneath that, we have interface language. This has to do with the interface language that's written inside the admin panel. For instance, I could set this to Norwegian and click Save. And you'll see that at least some of the text is now in my native language, which is Norwegian. So instead of personal settings, it says personlige innstillinger. But as you can see, not all of this is in Norwegian. For instance, it says don't share your API key, it's like a password. But the good thing is, if you use a language like German or French, all of this will actually be in German or French. It's very useful if you have authors that, for instance, don't speak English, or if you have a blog that goes in English. But the important thing here is this only has to do with the admin interface. I can set this to Norwegian and still type everything in English, and it'll appear in English on the blog itself. I'll set it back to English just for you. Below interface language, we have this primary blog. Primary blog kicks in if you have more than one blog administered under your account. For instance, if you set up 3 blogs, you can have one that's a primary, and that's the one that's related to when you use this My Blog function up in the wordpress.com toolbar. So if I click My Blog and then New Post, it'll automatically go to my primary blog. Proofreading is a fairly large option, and it gives you a lot of proofreading abilities. You should always check the 2 first ones so that all your posts and all your pages always have proofreading on. That way, at least you don't make massive misspellings without knowing about them. In addition, you have these English options that actually look at your language and tell you whether or not it's good published language. For instance, it'll warn you about biased language, cliches, complex phrases, and so on and so forth. It's kind of fun to activate all of them and just let WordPress comment on your writing style as you type, but it can also be a bit annoying. So it's one of those things where you kind of have to choose whether you want it or not. At the bottom here, you have this ignored phrases option that will ignore phrases that you know, for instance, are misspelled that you still want to keep there. A good one to add is something like Facebook, which always gets corrected. And at the very bottom, we have additional post content. This is an interesting feature that's connected to this Zemanta service. It basically reads your content and goes through the web and sees if it can find other content that's related to it and puts it in. This is a good feature if you write a blog. If you have a website that's for a company, for instance, it might not be such a good idea because you'll get content from other pages jammed into your own content. That's all the personal settings. In addition, you have these account details where you can set your account email. This is not to be confused with the public email. This is the email that's connected to your account. So if you lose your account name or your password, this is the email that information gets sent to. It also has the website that's connected to your email address. So this website does not need to be the website that you're currently working in. And it lets you reset your password to something else if you don't like it or if you think someone hacked it. And finally, you have the Save Changes button. It's at the bottom and it's also at the very top. And it's important that you remember to always click it when you make changes. WordPress provides customizability at every level. That includes how the backend admin area works. For the personal settings, you can control how WordPress works and behaves, and more importantly, you can get WordPress to help you with things like language and further information. Though often overlooked, personal settings are powerful and well worth the 2 minutes it takes to set them up properly.